The autumn rain pattered against the windows of the Blue Ridge Wildlife Center in Northern Virginia. Sarah Matthews pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she reviewed the day's intake forms. At 42, she had spent nearly 2 decades as a wildlife rehabilitator, but the work never grew routine. Every animal had a story, and every recovery represented a small victory in her ongoing battle to repair humanity's damages to the wild. The phone rang, cutting through the ambient sounds of the center, the distant chirps of songbirds in rehabilitation cages, the hum of medical equipment, and the occasional rustling from the recovery rooms. "Blue Ridge Wildlife. This is Sarah," she answered, tucking a strand of salt and pepper hair behind her ear. The voice on the other end belonged to Mike Donovan, a local park ranger she'd worked with for years. Sarah got a situation: adult female bobcat, found alongside Route 29. She's alive but injured. Right hind leg looks pretty bad, probably hit by a car. Sarah's posture straightened. Bobcats were special cases, fierce, wild to their core, and notoriously difficult to rehabilitate without causing additional stress that could further compromise their health. "How soon can you get here?" she asked, already mentally preparing the isolation room reserved for larger predators. 20 minutes. And Sarah... Mike paused. "There's something different about this one. Can't explain it, but I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've never seen a wild animal look at me the way this one did." After hanging up, Sarah called her assistant, Jaden, a wildlife biology graduate student from Virginia Tech. At 23, he possessed both the physical energy and the academic knowledge that made him invaluable to the understaffed center. "We've got a female bobcat coming in," she informed him. "Let's get isolation room 2 prepped. Fresh bedding, water, and the thermal support ready. And pull up the sedation protocols. We'll need to assess injuries." When Mike's truck pulled up outside, Sarah and Jaden were waiting with a transportation crate and protective equipment. The ranger emerged from the vehicle, carrying a large animal crate covered with a thick blanket. "She's been surprisingly calm," Mike reported, his voice low. "Still alert, though. Be careful." As they moved the crate into the examination room, Sarah caught her first glimpse of the bobcat through the grate. Tawny fur with distinctive black spots, tufted ears, and eyes that immediately fixed on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. They weren't filled with the usual wild fear or aggression. Instead, there was something that seemed almost like recognition. "I see what you mean," she murmured to Mike. The examination confirmed Mike's assessment. The bobcat had a compound fracture of the right hind leg, likely from impact with a vehicle. There were also lacerations along her flank and signs of moderate dehydration, but remarkably, no internal injuries were detected on the portable ultrasound. "She's been lucky," Sarah told Jaden as they finished wrapping the splintered leg. "With proper care, there's a good chance for recovery." Throughout the procedure, conducted under careful sedation, Sarah found herself repeatedly drawn to the animal's face. Even in unconsciousness, there was something uniquely expressive about the creature, a certain dignity in the lines of her features, a character that transcended the typical anonymity wild animals maintained in human presence. That night, after Mike had left and Jaden had gone home, Sarah found herself returning to the isolation room. The bobcat was awake now, the sedation having worn off. Unlike most wild predators who would hiss, spit, or throw themselves against the confines of their enclosure, this one remained still, following Sarah with her eyes. Those eyes, amber with flecks of gold, they held Sarah's gaze without blinking, not with the unfocused stare of a concussed animal or the glazed look of one in shock, but with clear, unmistakable awareness. "Who are you?" Sarah whispered, not expecting an answer but feeling compelled to acknowledge the connection somehow. The bobcat's ear twitched slightly. Then, in a gesture so human, it sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. The animal slowly blinked, deliberately closing and opening her eyes in what cat behaviorists recognized as a sign of trust. Sarah stepped back, both unnerved and fascinated. In all her years of wildlife rehabilitation, she had never experienced anything like this. This bobcat wasn't just a wild animal recovering from injuries. There was something happening here, a form of communication she couldn't quite decipher, but could certainly feel. As she drove home that night to her small cabin on the outskirts of town, Sarah couldn't shake the image of those eyes from her mind. Her husband David had passed away 3 years earlier after a brief battle with pancreatic cancer. Since then, her work had become her entire world. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, she felt the stirring of something different, a curiosity, a connection that extended beyond the clinical aspects of her job. "There's something about this one," she said to the framed photo of David on her nightstand. "I wish you could see her." She fell asleep, thinking of amber eyes that seemed to speak without words, and dreamed of forests deeper and older than any she had ever walked through. The next morning arrived with a crystalline clarity that often follows autumn storms in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Sarah arrived at the center earlier than usual, drawn by thoughts of the bobcat that had occupied her dreams throughout the night. "How's our patient?" she asked Jaden, who was already checking on the center's overnight residents. "Stable. She's eaten a little of the raw meat we left and the wound dressing looks clean," he reported, handing Sarah the morning's chart. "But there's something weird, Sarah. I came in to check vitals at 5 a.m. and she was just watching me. Not scared, not aggressive, just watching, like she was trying to figure something out." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. "I noticed the same thing yesterday. In the isolation room, the bobcat was awake and alert. When Sarah entered, the animal shifted position slightly, adjusting to keep her injured leg comfortable while maintaining eye contact. The intensity of that gaze hadn't diminished overnight. "Good morning," Sarah said softly, feeling only slightly foolish for speaking to the wild animal as if it could understand. "Let's see how that leg is doing today." As she approached the enclosure, the bobcat did something remarkable. Instead of retreating to the back corner as any wild animal would, she slowly extended her injured leg toward the front of the cage, almost as if presenting it for examination. Sarah froze, clipboard clutched to her chest. "Jaden," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "Come see this." Jaden entered and immediately noticed the bobcat's unusual posture. "That's not normal behavior," he stated, the scientific understatement unable to mask his amazement. "No," Sarah agreed. "It's not." The examination proceeded with unprecedented ease. While they still took all standard precautions, light sedation and protective equipment, the bobcat's cooperation was unlike anything either rehabilitator had experienced. "The fracture alignment looks good," Sarah noted as they reviewed the new X-rays. "If she keeps this calm, her chances of recovery without stress-induced complications are excellent." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Sarah would arrive early and spend time simply sitting near the bobcat's enclosure. She began speaking aloud, narrating her day, discussing the other animals in her care, or sometimes just sharing thoughts about the changing seasons. The bobcat would listen, those amber eyes fixed on Sarah with unwavering attention. Word of the unusual bobcat spread through the small staff of the Wildlife Center. Melissa, the center's veterinarian, came to observe. "In 25 years of wildlife medicine, I've never seen anything like it," she admitted, after watching the bobcat respond to Sarah's presence by approaching the front of the enclosure rather than retreating. "Wild bobcats don't habituate this quickly or this selectively. She's still appropriately wary of strangers." This was true. The bobcat maintained typical wild behaviors around anyone but Sarah. When Jaden or other staff members approached, she would retreat to her shelter, watching cautiously from a distance. Only with Sarah did she display the unusual trust and apparent understanding. One evening, about a week after the bobcat's arrival, Sarah was sitting on a stool beside the enclosure, reading aloud from a field journal she kept during her early years as a rehabilitator. The center was quiet, most staff having gone home for the day, and so the young fox kits were returned to the den site, where the mother was still waiting, despite it being 3 days since they'd been mistakenly removed by the well-meaning hikers, she read, glancing up to find the bobcat watching her intently. "That was one of my first lessons in wildlife rehabilitation. Sometimes the best solution is to undo human intervention rather than extend it. This done, the bobcat blinked slowly, then deliberately shifted her gaze toward the window where the sunset was painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Sarah followed her gaze. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said. "You miss being out there, I imagine." The bobcat looked back at her, and in that moment, Sarah felt she understood exactly what those eyes were saying. "Yes, but not yet. I'm not ready." It was absurd, of course. Sarah was a scientist, trained to avoid anthropomorphizing the animals in her care, and yet there was something happening here that transcended her training, something that spoke to older instincts than scientific methodology. That night, she found herself looking up historical accounts of human-wildlife connections, reading Native American stories of spirit animals and communication across species boundaries. The scientist in her remained skeptical, but another part, perhaps the part that had drawn her to wildlife rehabilitation in the first place, remained open to mysteries she couldn't fully explain. 3 weeks into the bobcat's rehabilitation, a significant milestone was reached. The fracture was healing well, and it was time to move the animal to the center's outdoor recovery enclosure, a crucial step before potential release. "This is where we'll see her true wild nature re-emerge," Sarah explained to Jaden as they prepared for the transfer. "Once she's in a more natural setting, with more space and environmental stimuli, her instincts should fully take over again." But when they successfully moved the bobcat to the spacious outdoor enclosure, complete with natural substrate, climbing structures and native vegetation, the animal's behavior towards Sarah remained unchanged. She still approached when Sarah entered, still maintained that eerie eye contact, still seemed to listen and respond to Sarah's voice in ways that defied conventional wildlife behavior. On a crisp November afternoon, Sarah brought her lunch to the observation deck overlooking the recovery enclosure. The bobcat spotted her immediately and climbed to the highest platform, positioning herself at eye level with Sarah despite the lingering stiffness in her healing leg. "The vet says you're healing beautifully," Sarah told her. "Another few weeks and you'll be strong enough for release." The bobcat's ears flattened slightly, and she lowered her gaze for the first time since their first encounter. "You know what I'm saying, don't you?" Sarah whispered, the realization hitting her with unexpected force. "Somehow you understand." That evening, as Sarah was completing paperwork in her office, Jaden knocked on her door with an unusual request. "There's someone here to see you and the bobcat," he said. "An elderly man named Thomas Blackfeather says he's from the local Monacan tribe. He heard about the bobcat from his grandson who volunteers with the Forest Service." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "It's after visiting hours." "I know," Jaden replied, "but he was pretty insistent. Said something about the bobcat being a message carrier. I wouldn't have bothered you, but Dean... But this whole situation is strange enough that maybe we should hear him out," Sarah finished, rising from her desk. "All right, I'll talk to him." Thomas Blackfeather was tall and straight-backed, despite his 70-plus years. He greeted Sarah with a firm handshake and clear, direct eye contact that reminded her, oddly enough, of the bobcat. "Thank you for seeing me, Dr. Matthews," he said. "I understand you have an unusual patient." Sarah led him to the observation area overlooking the outdoor enclosure. The bobcat, normally settling in for the evening by this hour, immediately approached the viewing glass when she saw Sarah. Thomas Blackfeather drew in a sharp breath. "She carries old knowledge," he said simply. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "In our traditions, animals sometimes serve as messengers when humans have forgotten how to listen to the world around them," he explained. "Not in a mystical sense, though that's how the stories are often told now, but in a very real way. Some animals develop unusual awareness, unusual connections to certain humans." He studied the bobcat for several long moments, then added, "This one has something to share with you, Dr. Matthews, something only you will understand when the time comes. With all due respect, Mr. Blackfeather, I'm a wildlife rehabilitator. My job is to heal this animal and return her to the wild," Sarah responded, though without the dismissive tone she might have used before meeting this particular bobcat. Thomas smiled gently. "Yes, and you will. But first, you will learn what she came to teach you. As they walked back toward the main building, Thomas stopped and placed a weathered hand on Sarah's arm. My people lived alongside the bobcat for thousands of years before your wildlife centers existed. We learned that they rarely come to humans without purpose. This one found you specifically, Dr. Matthews. The question is not what you will do for her, but what you will allow her to do for you. After Thomas left, Sarah returned to the observation deck. The bobcat was waiting, those amber eyes fixed on her with the same inscrutable intensity that had marked their first meeting. "What are you trying to tell me?" Sarah whispered against the glass. And though no answer came in words, Sarah felt something shift inside her, a recognition that perhaps the line between human and animal understanding was not as impermeable as her scientific training had led her to believe. December arrived, bringing shorter days and the first dusting of snow to the Blue Ridge Mountains. The bobcat's recovery had progressed remarkably well. The fracture had healed cleanly, and she had gradually regained full use of the injured leg. Physically, she was ready for release. Emotionally, Sarah wasn't sure if either of them was prepared. "All her health markers are excellent," Melissa confirmed during the final pre-release examination. "She's maintained good weight, shows appropriate wariness of humans other than you, and has demonstrated all the natural behaviors we look for before release." Sarah nodded, stroking the sedated bobcat's fur one last time before she would wake in the transport crate. "We've identified a suitable release site in the national forest, about 30 miles from where she was found. Good prey population. No recent bobcat territories identified in the immediate area." What Sarah didn't say was how the prospect of releasing this particular animal filled her with an inexplicable sense of loss. Over the weeks of rehabilitation, their silent conversations had become a cornerstone of her daily routine. The bobcat's presence had awakened something in Sarah that had been dormant since David's death, a sense of connection, of being truly seen. The release was scheduled for early morning. Sarah insisted on handling it personally, declining Jaden's offer to accompany her. This farewell needed to be private. The chosen site was a remote clearing in the George Washington National Forest, surrounded by the type of mixed woodland that bobcats preferred. Sarah parked her truck at the end of a Forest Service road and carried the transport crate the final quarter mile on foot. A light snow was falling, dusting the pines and bare deciduous trees with white. Sarah's breath formed clouds in the cold air as she carefully set the crate down in the clearing and knelt beside it. "This is good bobcat country," she said softly to the alert animal inside. "Plenty of rabbits, squirrels, good denning sites in those rock formations to the north." Until the bobcat watched her through the grate of the crate, those amber eyes as intense as ever. "I don't know if Thomas Blackfeather was right about you having a message for me," Sarah continued, her voice catching slightly. "But you've already changed something in me that needed changing. For that alone, I thank you." She reached for the latch on the crate door, then hesitated. "I've been doing this job for almost 20 years, and I've never had trouble releasing an animal before. It's the whole point of what we do, but with you," she shook her head, unable to articulate the complexity of her feelings. The bobcat made a soft sound, not a growl or a hiss, but something gentler, almost a chirp. Sarah took a deep breath and opened the crate door. What happened next defied every expectation based on her years of experience. Instead of bolting immediately for the forest as any wild animal would, the bobcat emerged slowly from the crate. She paused, shook her body as if settling her fur, then turned to face Sarah. For a long moment, they regarded each other in the silent, snow-dusted clearing. Then the bobcat did something extraordinary. She walked directly to Sarah and briefly pressed her forehead against Sarah's knee before stepping back. "Oh," Sarah breathed, tears springing to her eyes at this unprecedented gesture. The bobcat held her gaze one last time, blinking slowly in that deliberate way that had become familiar. Then she turned and moved toward the forest edge, her previously injured leg showing only the slightest hint of stiffness. At the tree line, she paused and looked back once more, before disappearing into the undergrowth. Sarah remained kneeling in the snow for several minutes, overwhelmed by what had just occurred. No wild bobcat should have behaved that way. It defied explanation, or at least it defied the explanations available within her scientific framework. As she finally rose to collect the empty crate, something caught her eye, a subtle movement in the forest about 50 yards from where the bobcat had entered. Focusing her gaze, Sarah discerned the forms of two bobcat kittens, nearly grown but still distinguishable from adults by their proportions. Understanding crashed over her. The female bobcat hadn't been alone when she was injured. She had kittens, likely old enough to survive temporarily on their own, but still dependent on their mother for teaching hunting skills and territory knowledge. "That's why you were different," Sarah whispered. "You had something to live for beyond yourself, someone waiting for you." As if in confirmation, the released bobcat reappeared briefly at the edge of the clearing, now flanked by the two nearly grown kittens. All three sets of eyes, one amber, four variously colored but equally wild, fixed on Sarah for one breathtaking moment before they melted back into the forest as a family reunited. Driving back to the wildlife center, Sarah found herself pulling over at a scenic overlook. The Blue Ridge Mountains stretched before her, ancient and enduring under their fresh coating of snow. She thought about what Thomas Blackfeather had said about the bobcat having something to teach her. The lesson suddenly seemed clear. Connections mattered. Family mattered. The bobcat had fought through pain and the terror of human handling, not just to survive, but to return to those who needed her, those to whom she belonged. Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled to a contact she hadn't called in months, her sister in Colorado, with whom she'd grown distant after David's death. "Hey, Karen," she said when her sister answered, surprised. "It's been too long. I was wondering, would it be okay if I came for Christmas this year? I'd really like to see you and the kids." That evening, Sarah added a final note to the bobcat's file before officially closing it. "Patient number 4721, adult female bobcat, successfully released following complete recovery from right hind leg fracture. Rejoined what appeared to be two subadult offspring at release site. Notable case for unusual level of apparent comprehension and species atypical behavior toward primary rehabilitator." She paused, then added one more line. "Some animals heal more than just themselves." 6 months later, Sarah was leading a training hike for new wildlife center volunteers when she felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck, the feeling of being watched. Scanning the forest edge, she caught a glimpse of tawny fur and the unmistakable silhouette of a bobcat on a rocky outcropping about 100 yards away. "Hold up, everyone," she told the group quietly, pointing. The bobcat stood motionless, amber eyes visible even at that distance. It was impossible to know with certainty if it was the same animal. And yet Sarah knew. The bobcat held her gaze for a long moment, blinked once, slowly and deliberately, then turned and disappeared into the forest. "That was amazing," one of the volunteers whispered. "Do you think it was one you rehabilitated?" Sarah smiled. "Yes," she said simply. "She came to remind me of something important." "What's that?" the volunteer asked. Sarah looked out over the ancient mountains, feeling more connected to this landscape and its wild inhabitants than she ever had before. That sometimes the eyes speak louder than words. You just have to know how to listen. As the group continued their hike, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude for the bobcat who had spoken without words, for the mysterious connections that defied scientific explanation, and for the understanding that healing, whether of broken bones or broken hearts, was rarely a solitary journey.